All right, let's talk about computer role-playing games. Today, we're going to get our hands dirty and really take one apart, piece by piece. We're going to look at the very DNA of these games, from the massive stories that keep us hooked for hundreds of hours, all the way down to the nitty-gritty design of a single inventory screen. So let's jump right in.
So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the blueprint, the big themes and ideas that drive these games. Then, we'll see how those ideas get built into a quest you can actually play. After that, we'll get into the different ways you interact with the world. And finally, we'll look at the player's toolkit, all the systems for managing your gear and loot.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning, with the heart and soul of any CRPG, its theme. I mean, what's that core hook that grabs you and convinces you to sink, maybe the next few months of your life into this world?
And here it is. The big one. The classic. You know the one. The fate of the entire world, maybe the universe, rests right on your shoulders. It often gets called an adolescent power fantasy. And look, it has been an incredibly effective hook for decades. But let's be honest, it's also a trope we've seen 1,000 times.
But the thing is, the best CRPGs prove you don't have to save the world to tell an amazing story. The most powerful quests can be driven by something way more personal. A burning desire for revenge, finding out who your parents really were, or just trying to get back home. These things create stakes that feel just as high because they matter so much to the character and to you.
And there is no better example of flipping that script than Planescape Torment. This game is legendary for a reason. It completely turns the camera inward. The central mystery isn't about some big, bad, evil guy. It's about answering the question, who am I? It's a journey about figuring yourself out, and it just goes to show how deep and profound these games can really be.
So, you've got your theme, you've got your big idea. How in the world do you build that into something people can actually play for dozens of hours? Well, that brings us to the structure of the quest. The most common way to do it is to make it episodic. You take that huge, overarching story and you break it down into smaller, more manageable chapters. Each episode almost feels like its own little self-contained story, and it maps the narrative out onto a physical journey, usually to a brand new place on the map.
And this right here, this creates such a satisfying gameplay loop. Think about it. You get to a new town, you have a main goal, but you're probably not strong enough to handle it just yet. So what do? You explore, you take on side quests, you get stronger, you get better gear, then you're finally ready to take on that big boss or solve that major puzzle, and your reward is unlocking the next chapter of the adventure. It's a brilliant rhythm.
And that's really the core job of a side quest. It's the main way you power up your character between those big story moments. They're usually pretty self-contained, right? Helping a farmer find his lost sheep probably isn't going to affect the dragon you have to slay later. They're just fun, optional little adventures that make you stronger and flesh out the world.
Okay, so we've got the narrative all mapped out. Now let's get into the moment-to-moment stuff. How do you actually play the game? This brings us to the different modes of interaction.
Unlike a lot of other genres that really focus on just one thing, CRPGs are all about flexibility. You can really boil down almost everything you do into these 4 major modes that you're constantly switching between. You're exploring and fighting, you're talking to people, you're buying and selling stuff, and you're managing all the loot you've picked up.
Nowadays, exploration and combat are usually seamless. You're just walking through a forest and boom, a goblin jumps out. There's no separate battle screen. It all happens right there. And that classic isometric view, like in the legendary Baldur's Gate 2, is just perfect for party-based games. It gives you that top-down, tactical view so you can command your whole squad at once.
Then, when you stop fighting and start talking, the whole game shifts gears. Your combat hardbar disappears, and it's replaced by a dialogue tree. This is the main tool for storytelling. The choices you make here, the questions you ask, the way you respond, they directly shape what you learn and how the story plays out.
And that brings us to our final section. Because beyond the fighting and the talking, a huge part of any CRPG is just stuff. You're always collecting gold, swords, potions, scrolls, you name it. So let's look at the systems we use to manage all these critical assets.
First up is the trade mode. This is a special screen just for doing business. You walk up to a shopkeeper, the game switches to this interface, and you can finally unload all that junk you've been carrying around. And hopefully you can use that cash to buy a shiny new axe or a pile of healing potions. It's really the economic engine of your whole adventure.
And then, of course, there's the inventory. For better or for worse, fiddling with your gear is an absolute cornerstone of the CRPG experience. It's your digital backpack, and let's be real, we've all spent way more time than we'd like to admit just organizing this one screen.
The most common way to handle this is the grid system. Your inventory is basically just a grid of empty squares. A little potion might take up one square, but a giant two-handed sword might take up a whole column of 6. And on top of that, you've usually got other rules, like how many arrows you can stack in one slot, or an overall weight limit that you can't exceed.
But here's where we get to a really common critique of this whole system. This design forces you to constantly play inventory Tetris. Every time you find a new item, you have to shuffle things around to make it fit. A lot of people argue that this is just busy work, a menial task that a computer could easily do for you, but it's still a staple of the genre.
And this really highlights that fundamental design choice. On the left, you've got the grid. It's visual, it feels tactile, but it also creates that busy work. On the right is an alternative, just a simple, abstract list with numbers for weight and volume. It's way more efficient because it's focused purely on function, not on pretending your inventory is a physical space.
And that really leads us to our final big question. Is this kind of micromanagement a design flaw that we should just get rid of? Or is the act of carefully organizing your gear, that slow, tactile, sometimes tedious process, actually a necessary part of what makes a role-playing game feel immersive and personal? It is a core debate in CRPG design, and frankly, there is no easy answer.